The thing about humans that the Galactic Council never quite grasped was our pathological need to protect anything we deemed cute. You'd think an advanced alien civilization would have done their homework before making first contact. But no, they somehow missed every single video of humans diving into frozen lakes to save dogs, rehabilitating injured squirrels in their garages, or spending their life savings on medical care for geriatric hamsters, which is how Captain Parker Sparks so Molly ended up in this particular mess, standing before the Galactic Council's Department of Zenop for relations with what appeared to be a floating iridescent jellyfish. Humming the theme from Star Wars for the third time, Officer Z. Click I said, trying to keep my voice level. Bubbles here is not a Class 4 restricted species. She's my emotional support. Alien. The insectoid bureaucrat's antennae twitched in what I'd learned was the universal sign for intergalactic irritation. Captain O.M. Ollie. There is no such classification as emotional support alien in our database. Well, maybe there should be. I reached up to scratch what I assumed was Bubbles' equivalent of a chin, causing her to emit a series of pleased musical notes. Look at her. She's clearly living her best life. Officer Z. Click's compound eyes reflected my image back at me 12 times, each one somehow managing to convey disapproval. Captain, this is the 8th non-terrestrial creature you've attempted to register this month. 7 actually. The sentient moss colony decided it preferred living in my shower and filed for independent citizenship. That's not better. Captain, I shrugged, watching as Bubbles drifted lazily around my head, her translucent tentacles now humming something that sounded suspiciously like Never Going to Give You Up. I'd found her 3 days ago in an abandoned space station, trapped in what looked like some sort of stasis field. After I disabled the field, she'd immediately attached herself to my shoulder and started mimicking every sound she heard. How could anyone expect me to leave her there? Look, I said, pulling out my data pad. I filled out all the required forms. Form X772 for non-terrestrial companion registration, Form Z115 for potentially telepathic species housing permits, and even Form Q999 for creatures that occasionally phase through solid matter. She phases through solid matter only when she sneezes, and technically it's more like temporarily existing in multiple dimensions at once. Very convenient for getting her through security checkpoints. Actually, the bureaucrat's mandibles clacked in what I recognized as the precursor to a full administrative meltdown. But before Officer Zit Click could launch it, another recitation of the Galactic Code of Xenopa transportation, something strange happened. The ambient lighting in the station shifted from its usual sterile white to a deep purple, and a low hum began reverberating through the walls. Bubbles, who had been contentedly floating near the ceiling and practicing her rendition of Bohemian Rhapsody, suddenly went silent. Her normally shifting colors settled into a deep pulsing blue. That's never happened before, I muttered, just as every screen in the registration office flickered to life. Simultaneously, ancient symbols began scrolling across them, symbols I'd never seen in my 5 years of diplomatic service. Officer Zit Click's antennae went rigid. Impossible, they chittered. These are guardian glyphs, but they've been extinct for millennia. Guardian glyphs. I reached up to steady Bubbles, who had started trembling slightly like the ancient ant species that supposedly watched over the galaxy. Before anyone else achieved spaceflight, the bureaucrat was already rushing to gather other officials, their chittering reaching a fever pitch as the symbols continued their endless scroll across every available surface. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd somehow stumbled into something much bigger than a simple pet registration dispute. Bubbles, apparently recovering from her shock, began humming again. This time, it was the theme from Jaws. Not helping, girl, I muttered, not helping at all. The next few hours were a blur of importantal-looking aliens rushing around, urgent meetings being called, and Bubbles working her way through the entire soundtrack of The Little Mermaid. I'd been moved to a secure waiting area, which was really just a fancier version of the regular waiting area, with slightly more comfortable chairs and significantly more surveillance devices. That's when Council MRXS 427 made their grand entrance. Picture, if you will, a being that looks like someone tried to cross a peacock with a corporate lawyer and then gave it too much coffee. Their ceremonial robes swished dramatically as they approached, though the effect was somewhat ruined by Bubbles choosing that exact moment to start performing under the sea. Captain O.M. Ollie Brax 427 said, their head feathers rippling in what I assumed was meant to be an intimidating manner. Do you have any idea what you've done? Filed my pet. Registration papers. Slightly late. You've triggered the activation of an ancient warning system. They gestured to the still scrolling symbols, one that was specifically designed to alert the galaxy about humans. I blinked. Come again. A hollow projector hummed to life, displaying a translation of the Guardian text. As I read, I felt my eyebrows climbing higher and higher. Warning: species designation human. Demonstrates extremely aggressive protection instincts toward other life forms. Will adopt literally anything. Attempts to separate humans from adopted creatures may result in extreme retaliation, including, but not limited to, elaborate rescue missions, establishment of underground railroad-style sanctuary networks, and strongly worded letters to planetary governing bodies. Current count of human adopted species 14,700 rising. Good luck with that, huh? I said, watching Bubbles do lazy loop-de-loops around the hollow projector. That actually explains a lot about our first contact. Your first contact, 5427's feathers puffed up in agitation. You mean when humanity's first response to meeting alien life was to ask if you could pet it? In our defense, your diplomatic envoy did look exactly like a space puppy. It was a highly respected elder, the Canid Confederation, who we immediately gave belly rubs and treats to. Yes, I smiled at the memory. Ambassador Good Boy still sends us Christmas cards. 5427 began pacing their robes, swishing with increasing agitation. This is precisely the problem. Do you know what happened after that first contact? Within one standard galactic year, humans had established no fewer than 50 interstellar animal shelters. You have members of your species who specialized in rehabilitating space whales. Space whales, Captain, someone has to help them migrate through the asteroid fields, I pointed out reasonably. Besides, have you seen baby space whales? They're adorable. This is Sirius 5427. Snapped. The Guardians left this warning for a reason. Your species has been systematically collecting and in caring for creatures from every corner of the galaxy. We prefer the term rescue, I corrected, and I still don't see the problem. That's when 5427 dropped the bomb. The problem, Captain, is that your latest rescue isn't just any stray. According to our scans, your Bubbles is the last known surviving member of the Guardian species itself. I turned to look at Bubbles, who had switched to humming. I will survive, with what now seemed like pointed intention. Well, I said after a moment, that explains why she's so good at karaoke. 5427's feathers were now fully extended in what I recognized as the universal sign for I'm about to do something drastically stupid. This is exactly why the Council has voted to implement Immediate Protocol 47, which is the mandatory separation of all non-rest RAL creatures from human custody. They straightened their robes, importantly for the greater good of galactic stability. I felt my smile freeze in place. I'm sorry, you want to do what now? We're going to take away all human pets, they said, as if explaining something to a particularly dense child, including your guardian friend. Their Bubbles stopped humming. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees, and I felt something deep in my human DNA activate the same thing that makes little old ladies charge into traffic to save kittens, that drives people to build entire rooms in their houses for their reptile collections, that caused humanity to domesticate wolves by essentially loving them into submission. No, I said pleasantly. I don't think you will. 5427 blinked all four of their eyes. I don't think you understand. This isn't a request the Council has already. No, I interrupted even more pleasantly. I don't think you understand. Humanity has spent its entire existence taking in strays, protecting the weak, and anthropomorphizing literally anything with eyes. We once went to war to protect our pets during an evacuation. We have an entire industry dedicated to pet furniture. There are people on Earth who have full-time jobs as dog photographers. I stood up, Bubbles drifting protectively behind my shoulder, now humming the Imperial March with remarkable accuracy. So let me be very clear. If you try to take our alien pets, you're not just going to have a diplomatic incident on your hands. You're going to have to deal with every human who's ever looked at a dangerous alien creature and said, oh, it's trying to kill me. How cute. The look on 5427's face suggested they were finally beginning to understand exactly what the Guardian warning had been trying to tell them. Unfortunately, for everyone involved, they were about to learn it the hard way. Behind me, Bubbles started humming. Eye of the Tiger news travels fast in space. News about someone trying to take away pets travels even faster. By the time I'd finished my conversation with 5427, my communicator was already buzzing with messages from every human pet owner in the sector. They calling it Operation Poor Patrol, I explained to Bubbles. As we hurried through the station's corridors, she was now humming the Mission Impossible theme, which felt appropriately dramatic. Every human with an alien pet is going into hiding until we can sort this out. My comm chirped again. This time it was from Dr. Mara Patel, who ran a rehabilitation center for what she called misunderstood space monsters out on Europa. Sparks. They just tried to confiscate Mr. Snuggles. Her voice was tight with barely contained rage. Do you have any idea how long it took me to convince a Proxim and Void Beast to answer to Mr. Snuggles? Is he okay? Oh, he's fine. Turns out Void Beasts really don't like being separated from their humans. The Council enforcement team is currently trapped in a pocket dimension. I told them Mr. Snuggles gets cranky when he misses his afternoon walk. But would they listen? No. Behind me I could hear the station's security forces mobilizing. 5427 was apparently wasting no time implementing Protocol 47. Unfortunately for them, they were about to learn that humans had been preparing for this sort of scenario since we first started domesticating wolves. Captain O.M. Ali, a familiar chittering voice, called out. Officer Ziz Click was rushing toward us. Anthony twitching frantically. Wait. I turned ready to make a break for it. But something in their stance made me pause. They didn't look hostile. They looked worried. The Count's soul, they chittered quietly, glancing around. They don't understand. I've been processing human pet registrations for 3 cycles. I've seen what you do for these creatures. And I have 7 human rehabilitated arthropod silk spinners living in my quarters. They make the most beautiful web art. I won't let them take them. I felt a grin spreading across my face. Officer, are you saying what I think you're saying? Their mandibles clicked in what I now recognized as determination. I may know of some maintenance tunnels that aren't on the official station schematics, tunnels that lead to the private docking bays, and I may have accidentally processed emergency travel permits for several dozen human pet owners in the last hour. Bubbles drifted over to Ziz Click and played a few bars of You've Got a Friend in Me. That's when the station-wide announcement system crackled to life. 5427's voice echoed through the corridors. Attention, all station residents, by order of the Galactic Council, all non-terrestrial creatures in human custody are to be surrendered immediately. Failure to comply will result in the announcement cut off, abruptly replaced by what sounded like barking. My comm lit up again. This time, it was Tommy Chen, a teenager who somehow taught a pack of silicon-based life forms to play fetch. Don't worry, Captain, my crystal dogs figured out how to hack the station's comm system. They're very good boys. More messages were pouring in. Linda Martinez's psychic octopuses were jamming security scanners. Professor Williams's collection of reformed space pirates, who insisted they were now legitimate privateers with excellent health care benefits, were running interference with Council ships. And somewhere in the Kyer Belt, Dr. James Sanctuary for retired military bioweapons was organizing what they called a strongly worded protest. They really should have read the warning more carefully, I muttered, as Zit Click led us through a hidden access panel. Part about extreme retaliation wasn't just a suggestion. The maintenance tunnel was cramped, dimly lit, and currently occupied by what appeared to be a procession of humans and their various alien companions. I spotted at least 3 different species that were supposedly extinct, several that technically didn't exist according to official records, and one that appeared to be a sentient cloud of sparkles wearing a bow tie. The Council's bringing in reinforcements. Zit Click warned as we hurried along. They're calling it a humanitarian intervention. I snorted. Humanitarian? They're trying to separate humans from their pets. The last time someone tried that, I paused, remembering a particularly infamous incident involving a mall security guard and Mrs. Henderson's collection of reformed criminal space rabbits. The mall still hadn't fully recovered. Bubbles, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly began to glow more brightly. Symbols similar to the Guardian warning started appearing on the tunnel walls around us. Bubbles, I asked nervously, is this a good light show or a bad light show? In response, she played the opening notes of We Will Rock You, followed by what sounded suspiciously like the THX sound. Effect the symbols began to shift and change, forming words in Standard Galactic Common Protocol, Omega, initiated Guardian Defense Network activation sequence, commencing well I said as the station's artificial gravity hiccuped around us, that seems promising Z-Click's antenna went rigid the Guardian Defense Network. But that's just a myth, a story to scare LVY about the consequences of galactic warfare. Bubbles spun in a happy circle and started playing the chorus of Don't Stop, Believe in. I had a feeling things were about to get very interesting. And if there's one thing humanity has learned from our long history of pet ownership, it's that when your pet starts acting weird, you should probably pay attention. The station shuddered again, and somewhere above us, alarms began to wail. If you've never seen an emergency meeting of the Intergalactic Pet Parents Association, imagine a PTA meeting crossed with a Star Wars cantina scene. But everyone's showing off pictures of their babies. We'd gathered in what used to be a maintenance bay, now converted into an impromptu command center by several hundred very determined humans and their increasingly concerned alien allies. Order, called out Barbara Watson, a retired librarian who now ran a sanctuary for abandoned alien plants. Her prize specimen, a carnivorous vine she'd named Frederick, was helpfully banging a gavel with one of its tendrils. The IPA emergency session will now come to order. I stood at the back watching as Bubbles floated around the room, apparently scanning everyone with soft pulses of blue light. She'd stopped her musical commentary, which was either a very good sign or a very, very bad one. First item of business, Barbara continued, while Frederick organized her notes. Status reports, Dr. Patel. How are the resistance efforts going? Me stood up, her tablet displaying various charts and graphs. The good news is that Operation P Patrol is working thanks to Officer Z-Click and other sympathetic station staff. We've managed to evacuate 73% registered human companion pairs to safe locations. And the bad news, the council's brought in the Regulatory Enforcement Division. She grimaced. The red teams. A collective groan went up from the assembly. The red teams were the council's elite enforcement units, known for their strict adherence to regulations and complete lack of sense of humor. They made regular bureaucrats look positively laid back in comparison. But we have something they don't. Tommy Chen piped up from where he was playing fetch with his crystal dogs. We have the power of love. And also Mr. Snuggles' pocket dimension mentions. Speaking of unusual powers, I stepped forward. There's something you all should know about Bubbles. I explained about the Guardian, warning Bubbles' true identity and the mysterious defense network that was apparently now activating. The room erupted into excited chatter, only to be silenced by Frederick banging the gavel again. So you're telling me, Barbara said slowly, that this entire time humanity's tendency to adopt everything in sight was actually part of some ancient species plan, more like they recognized a species after their own hearts. Officer Z-Click chittered from their position near the door. The Guardians were known for their protective instincts. The legends say they once relocated an entire solar system because one of its planets had particularly cute microscopic life forms. That's when my comm crackled to life with an incoming transmission. The holographic display showed 5427, their feathers now so puffed up, they looked like an angry space peacock who'd stuck their beak in an electrical socket. Captain O.M. Ollie, they said, trying to sound dignified despite their appearance. This resistance is futile. We have red team stationed at every major port. We've locked down all transportation hubs. We've even impounded that ridiculous human space station that's shaped like a giant fire hydrant. Hey, someone, protested the hydrant, is a legitimate research facility dedicated to the study of Zerog gravity. Fetch racks 427. Ignored the interruption. You have 1 hour to surrender all non-terrestrial creatures, or we'll be forced to take more dramatic action. The transmission cut off, and the room burst into concerned murmuring. But before anyone could panic, Bubbles suddenly shot center of the room, glowing brighter than ever. The Guardian symbols appeared again, this time forming a complex three-dimensional display. Are those Officer Z-Click's antennae twitched in disbelief? Station schematics. They were more than that. They were schematics for every station, ship, and facility in the sector, and judging by the way certain sections were highlighted in pulsing gold light, they were showing us something very specific. Those are the environmental control systems. Mira realized, her eyes widening, every single one of them. I felt a slow grin spreading across my face as I remembered something from the original Guardian warning. Hey, What was that part about underground railroad-style sanctuary networks again? Bubbles spun in an excited circle, and finally broke her musical silence with the opening bars of Break Free by Queen. The assembled humans and aliens looked at each other. As understanding dawned, the Guardians hadn't just been warning the galaxy about humans. They'd been preparing for this exact scenario. They'd built back doors into every major system in known space, just waiting for the right moment and the right species to use them. Well, Barbara said, adjusting her glasses, while Frederick wrapped an encouraging tendril around her shoulders, I suppose it's time to show the council exactly why you don't mess with pet parents in any species. Across the room, humans and aliens alike began grinning. Mr. Snuggles burped up another pocket dimension. The crystal dog started glowing with anticipation, and somewhere in the distance, we could hear the sound of the red teams marching towards us, completely unaware that they were about to face the most determined force in the galaxy. A bunch of humans who'd been told they couldn't keep their pets. The thing about humans that the Galactic Council really should have considered more carefully is that we once domesticated wolves by basically saying that killing machine has sad eyes, I'm going to give it a sandwich, and then kept doing it until the wolves gave up and became dogs. When you combine that level of determined friendliness with advanced alien technology, things tend to get interesting, which is how I found myself standing in the main council chamber, surrounded by red team members, while Bubbles floated serenely beside me, performing what sounded like a mashup of the final countdown and the Jaws theme. This is your final warning. 427, announced from their elevated podium, their feathers still refusing to lay flat. Surrender the Guardian entity and all other non-terrestrial creatures, or face the consequences. Counter offer, I said cheerfully. How about you look at your environmental controls? The council members all turned to their displays, just in time to see every system in the station switch to what the readouts were calling Guardian Override Operation Puppy Eyes. That's when the chaos started all across the station. Environmental systems began creating what can only be described as optimal pet conditions. The artificial gravity in the red team barracks switched to excited puppy levels, making it impossible for them to walk in a straight line. The temperature controls in the detention centers decided that everyone needed perfect napping weather, and the station's main computer began broadcasting a continuous loop of what sounded suspicious lie like Sarah McLean's Angel. What have you done? RX 427 demanded, their voice rising to a screech as reports began flooding in from across the sector. We didn't do anything, I said innocently. Bubbles here just activated a few protocols that the Guardians left behind. Did you know they built pet-friendly override systems into literally everything? It's like they knew someone would try this eventually. On my comm, I could see the resistance plans unfolding. Tommy's crystal dogs had taken control of all the security cameras, replacing the feeds with an endless stream of cute animal videos. Mr. Snuggles had turned the main detention facility into what Dr. Patel was calling a non-Yukon pet park. And somewhere in the Kuiper Belt, those reformed military bioweapons were organizing what they termed a very aggressive snuggle campaign. This is impossible, one of the council members shouted. The Guardians were the most advanced species in galactic history. They wouldn't have built in such ridiculous safeguards, I suggested. Have you met humans? We once built a giant mechanical dog just because we could. The Guardians probably took one look at us and thought, finally someone who gets it. That's when Bubbles decided to up the ante. She drifted to the center of the chamber, her glow intensifying until she looked like a miniature sun. The Guardian symbols appeared again, but this time they were different. Instead of warnings or schematics, they were showing memories. Images flashed around the chamber. The Guardians, discovering their first alien life forms, their immediate reaction to protect and nurture the careful construction of their defense networks, not to wage war, but to preserve and protect. And finally, their discovery of Earth, watching from afar as humans did exactly the same thing they had done, finding life everywhere they went and immediately deciding to care for it. They weren't warning about us, I realized watching the images play out. They were waiting for us. They built all this because they knew someday another species would come along who couldn't help but protect everything they found. But the regulations of 427 spluttered. Oh, put a sock in it. Barbara's voice came over the comm. She and Frederick had apparently taken control of the station's communication systems. Some things are more important than regulations like love and proper pet care, and making sure Mr. Snuggles doesn't get cranky and fold the space-time continuum again. Bubbles punctuated this statement by playing the most triumphant rendition of We Are the Champions I've ever heard. The council chamber had gone silent, every alien present watching, as the last guardian showed them exactly why their predecessors had chosen humanity as their successors. We weren't a threat to galactic stability. We were its designated pet sitters. And that's when the Red Team commander did something unexpected. They reached into their uniform and pulled out a photo. "This is Squeakers," they said quietly, showing a picture of what appeared to be a tentacled ball of fluff. "A human helped me rescue her from a quantum storm 2 cycles ago. I can't give her up one by one." Other Red Team members began producing similar evidence pictures of alien pet stories of rescues, even a few actual creatures that they'd been hiding in their uniforms. I turned to 427, whose feathers had finally started to settle. "Still want to try enforcing Protocol 47. Their reply was cut off by a series of alarms, but these weren't warning alarms, they were proximity alerts, thousands of them. The station's main viewpoint flickered to life, showing us what was happening outside ships, hundreds of ships, thousands of ships, every human with an alien pet, every alien with a human rescued companion, every sanctuary and shelter and rehabilitation center in known space had come to make their position clear. And well, I said to Bubbles, who had started playing Who Let the Dogs Out with what I felt was unnecessary SAS, "I guess this is what they meant by extreme retaliation. And it wasn't the massive fleet of pet owners, or the Guardian defense systems, or even Mr. Snuggles' increasingly creative use of pocket dimensions that finally convinced the council to back down. It was something much simpler." Bubbles started crying, not tears, exactly, more like tiny sparkles of light that drifted down, while she played the saddest possible version of My Heart Will Go On that I've ever heard. The sight of the last Guardian being sad about the possibility of being separated from her human was apparently too much for even the most hardened bureaucrat to handle. "Oh, stop that, Bra 427, said, their feathers drooping. That's not fair." Bubbles responded by somehow making her lights dim pathetically, while adding a minor key rendition of All By Myself to her performance. "I suppose," one of the other council members said slowly, "that we could review Protocol 47, perhaps. Some amendments could be made." Amendments, Barbara's voice crackled over the comm. "How about we start with the fact that half your own enforcement teams are secret pet owners?" The Red Team commander stepped forward, Squeakers now perched proudly on their shoulder. "She has a point. And technically, according to subsection 7 of the Galactic Charter, if a sufficient number of member species register formal protest, fine." Brax 427 threw up their hands, sending few frustrated feathers floating through the air. "Fine. The protocol is suspended pending review. But we need some sort of regulation. We can't just have humans running around adopting everything they see." "Actually, Officer Zit," Click chittered, mandibles clicking in what I now recognized as they're about to cite obscure regulations. "Pose there might be a solution. The Guardians did leave behind a comprehensive set of guidelines for interspecies companionship." Bubbles immediately stopped her sad music concert and began projecting more symbols, but these weren't warnings or defense schematics. They were care guides, detailed loving instructions for how to look after every species the Guardians had ever encountered. They really did think of everything. I marveled, watching as millennia of accumulated pet care knowledge filled the chamber. Look, they even included dietary recommendations and preferred scratching locations. "This is actually..." One of the council scientists leaned forward, antennae twitching with interest. "This is incredibly thorough research. The behavioral studies alone could advance our understanding of xenobiology by centuries." And I added, "It could form the basis for actual sensible regulations, one that protect both the creatures and their caregivers." Which is how 3 standard weeks later I found myself back in Officer Zist Click's office. But this time, instead of processing pet registration forms, they were helping me fill out my application for the newly established Interstellar Animal Welfare and Protection Service. "You understand," they chittered, while stamping the forms, "that, as the human Lee onto the Guardian Legacy Division, you'll be responsible for helping implement these new guidelines across the sector. As long as I get to keep." Bubbles, I said, watching as she entertained a group of newly registered pets with her rendition of Hakuna Matata. Oh, about that Zit Click's antennae twitched in what I now knew was amusement according to the Guardian records. You don't actually have a choice in that matter. It seems that when a Guardian chooses a human, it's quite permanent, like a cosmic adoption. More like they consulted their terminal yes. The official Guardian classification is congratulations, you have been chosen. As a forever home, Bubbles drifted over, humming what sounded suspicious, lie-like part of your world. The new regulations were working better than anyone had expected. The red teams had been reorganized into the Pet Emergency Response Division, with their first mission being the construction of the galaxy's largest zero-gravity dog park. Mr. Snuggles had been appointed as the official consultant on interdimensional pet transportation safety. And somewhere in the Kyber Belt, those reformed military bioweapons were running a surprisingly successful fall pet therapy program. As for the council, well, let's just say that after 427 was introduced to a particularly charming swarm of space butterflies, who now live in their office and help organize their files, their attitude toward human pet ownership underwent a dramatic shift. The Guardian warning still scrolls across screens occasionally, but these days it's followed by an addendum update. Humans have been officially designated as the galaxy's pet sitters. Resistance is futile. They will find you, and they will pet you, I said to Bubbles as we prepared for our first official inspection tour. I think the Guardians knew exactly what they were doing when they chose us. She responded by playing Circle of Life at full volume, because some things never change, and somewhere in the vast expanse of space, I like to think the ancient Guardians are looking down at their chosen successes, a species so determined to care for others, that we built our first space station in the shape of a fire hydrant, and thinking, yes, these are the ones who will keep them all safe, even if we do tend to give everything silly names and talk to them in baby voices, especially then.